The underground parking garage of Walsh Industries echoed with the sharp click of expensive heels as Diana Walsh hurried toward her BMW, clutching a briefcase worth millions. Alex Carter adjusted his security uniform and checked his watch. Another quiet night shift almost over, his military-trained eyes automatically scanning the shadows. 3 masked figures emerged from behind the concrete pillars with practiced silence, moving toward the unsuspecting CEO like predators. Diana's scream pierced the garage as rough hands grabbed her from behind, her briefcase clattering to the ground. Alex's body moved before his mind could process the situation, years of special forces training overriding every instinct as he sprinted toward the chaos. The kidnappers were already dragging Diana toward a waiting van, her struggles futile against their coordinated assault. "Let her go." Alex's voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat, though Diana had no idea her unlikely savior possessed such deadly skills. Alex Carter had learned to appreciate the quiet predictability of night shifts at Walsh Industries. The 38-year-old former Special Forces operative moved through the empty corridors with the measured pace of someone who had found peace in routine. His security uniform a far cry from the tactical gear he'd once worn in places most people couldn't pronounce. The corporate headquarters transformed after hours into a different world, one where the only sounds were the gentle hum of computers and the occasional creak of settling steel and glass. His son Jake would be sleeping soundly in their modest apartment 12 blocks away, probably dreaming about the baseball game they'd planned for the weekend. At 10 years old, Jake had inherited his father's quiet determination, but thankfully, none of the shadows that sometimes crossed Alex's face when he thought no one was looking. The boy was everything good that had come from Alex's marriage to Sarah, before cancer had taken her and left them to navigate the world as a team of 2. The security job wasn't glamorous, but it provided what Alex valued most: stability and time with his son. His shifts ended at 6 in the morning, just early enough to make Jake breakfast before school and late enough to avoid the daytime staff who might ask questions about why a man with his obvious capabilities was content to walk empty hallways and monitor surveillance screens. Alex had been making his rounds on the 15th floor when he heard the elevator chime in the lobby. He glanced at his watch. 11:45 p.m., well past the time when anyone should be in the building. Through the security monitors, he watched a woman in an expensive suit emerge from the elevator, her stride confident and purposeful as she headed toward the executive offices. Even on the grainy black and white screen, Alex recognized Diana Walsh, the CEO, whose company name was emblazoned on his paycheck. Diana moved through the office with the efficiency of someone who lived and breathed corporate success. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and even at this late hour, her makeup was flawless, her posture perfect. She disappeared into her corner office, and Alex returned to his patrol, noting her presence in his log but thinking nothing more of it. Executives working late wasn't unusual. The wealthy and powerful operated on different schedules than the rest of the world. 20 minutes later, Alex was checking the parking garage levels when he saw Diana heading toward her car. She moved quickly, her heels clicking against the concrete in a rhythm that spoke of someone eager to get home. The briefcase in her hand swung slightly as she walked, and Alex noticed how she clutched it protectively against her side. Whatever was in that case was clearly valuable, important enough to warrant a late-night trip to the office. The parking garage was a maze of concrete pillars and shadows, dimly lit by fluorescent fixtures that cast harsh pools of light between areas of darkness. Alex had always disliked this part of the building. Too many blind spots, too many places for trouble to hide. His military training had taught him to assess threats and vulnerabilities automatically, and the garage scored poorly on both counts. Diana was halfway to her BMW when Alex noticed the movement in his peripheral vision. 3 figures, dressed in dark clothing with ski masks covering their faces, emerged from behind different pillars with the synchronized precision of a well-planned operation. They moved like professionals, their positions calculated to cut off Diana's escape routes, while remaining hidden from the security cameras that Alex knew had blind spots in exactly those locations. The attack happened faster than most people could process, but Alex's combat experience allowed him to see it unfold in slow motion. The leader grabbed Diana from behind, his hand covering her mouth to muffle her scream. The second man lunged for her briefcase while the third scanned the area for witnesses. Diana's eyes were wide with terror, her body struggling against her captor's grip as the reality of her situation sank in. Alex's training kicked in before his conscious mind could weigh the consequences. He had moved through dangerous situations so many times that his body responded automatically. Assess, prioritize, act. The distance between his position and Diana's attackers was roughly 60 feet. The kidnappers were focused on their target and hadn't noticed him yet. The garage's acoustics would amplify any noise, which could work for or against him, depending on how he played it. "Hey!" Alex shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with the kind of authority that made people stop and listen. "Security! Let her go!" The three men froze for a split second, their heads turning toward Alex with the predatory alertness of animals caught in the act. The leader's grip on Diana tightened, and Alex could see the calculation in his eyes. Fight or flight, depending on how much of a threat the lone security guard represented. Alex spread his stance slightly, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture that nevertheless positioned him to move quickly in any direction. "I said, let her go. We can talk about this." The leader laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Back off, old man. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Alex replied, taking a step forward. "Building security is my job. And right now, you're trespassing." The third man pulled out a gun, its black metal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Stay back or we'll add you to the collection." Alex felt the familiar calm descend over him, the same mental state that had kept him alive through 3 deployments and countless dangerous situations. Time seemed to slow as he analyzed the tactical situation. 3 armed men, 1 hostage, multiple escape routes, limited cover. The odds weren't great, but he'd faced worse. "You don't want to do this," Alex said, his voice steady and conversational. "Building's full of cameras. Police response time to this area is 4 minutes. You're already looking at kidnapping charges. Don't add murder to the list." The leader's eyes narrowed behind his mask. "How do you know police response time?" Alex smiled grimly. "Because I used to be the kind of guy who needed to know things like that." The moment stretched like a held breath. Diana's terrified gaze met Alex's across the garage, and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not just fear, but a dawning recognition that her unlikely savior might actually know what he was doing. The leader made his decision. Take him down. The gunman swung his weapon toward Alex, but Alex was already moving. Years of combat training had taught him that the time to act was always now. Hesitation got people killed. He dove behind a concrete pillar as the first shot rang out, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Alex's mind cataloged the situation with military precision. 3 hostiles, at least 1 firearm, 1 civilian in immediate danger. Rules of engagement were clear. Neutralize the threat, protect the innocent, survive to fight another day. The fact that the innocent civilian was Diana Walsh, CEO of the company that employed him, was irrelevant to his tactical assessment. The second shot chipped concrete inches from Alex's head, sending dust and debris flying. He could hear Diana's muffled protests and the quick, urgent voices of the kidnappers as they tried to figure out how to handle this unexpected complication. They'd planned for a quick grab and run, not a firefight with someone who clearly had professional training. Alex risked a glance around the pillar. The gunman was advancing on his position, while the other 2 tried to drag Diana toward their van. She was fighting them every step of the way, her struggles buying precious seconds that Alex needed to even the odds. "Diana," Alex called out, his voice carrying the snap of a military command. "When I say drop, hit the ground and stay down." The leader looked up sharply at the sound of Alex using Diana's first name. "You know her?" "I know a lot of things," Alex replied, already moving to his next position. "Including how this ends for you if you don't walk away right now." The garage erupted in chaos as Alex made his move. He came around the pillar low and fast, using the shadows and concrete supports as cover while he closed the distance to the gunman. The man fired twice more, but Alex was no longer where he'd been, and the shots went wide. Alex tackled the gunman with the full force of his military training, driving him to the ground with an impact that knocked the wind out of both of them. The gun skittered across the concrete, disappearing into the shadows between parked cars. Alex had trained for hand-to-hand combat against multiple opponents, and muscle memory took over as he disabled his opponent with swift, efficient movements. The other two kidnappers were shouting now, their carefully planned operation falling apart as they tried to decide whether to abandon their target or help their fallen comrade. Diana took advantage of their confusion to break free, stumbling away from her captors and putting distance between herself and the van. "Run!" Alex shouted as he grappled with the second attacker. "Get to the elevator!" But Diana didn't run. Instead, she grabbed the fallen gun and pointed it at the remaining kidnapper with shaking hands. "Don't move!" she screamed, her voice high with adrenaline and fear. The third man looked between Diana's trembling hands and Alex's determined face, and made the smart choice. He raised his hands in surrender, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "We're done! We're done!" Alex secured the second attacker with zip ties from his security belt, then moved to check on Diana. She was still holding the gun, her knuckles white against the black metal, her breathing rapid and shallow. Her carefully styled hair had come loose during the struggle, and there was a small cut on her cheek where she'd been struck. "It's okay," Alex said softly, approaching her the way he might approach a wounded animal. "You can put the gun down now, it's over." Diana looked at him with eyes that were wide with shock and something else, a dawning realization that was more unsettling than the attack itself. You know how to fight. Really fight." Alex gently took the gun from her shaking hands. "I know a lot of things, Diana, but right now, we need to call the police and get you checked out by a medic." As sirens began to wail in the distance, Diana stared at Alex with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and confusion. The man who had just saved her life was supposed to be a simple security guard, someone invisible and forgettable who wandered the halls of her building during the quiet hours. But the way he'd moved, the way he'd handled the situation, the casual competence with which he'd neutralized 3 armed men, none of that matched the mild-mannered employee she'd barely noticed in 3 years of late-night encounters. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex met her gaze steadily, and for a moment, Diana saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was the look of a man who had seen too much, done too much, and was carrying the weight of experiences that most people couldn't imagine. "I'm just a security guard, ma'am," he said quietly. "Someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time." But even as he spoke the words, both of them knew it wasn't true. Alex Carter was much more than a security guard, and Diana Walsh was beginning to realize that her life had just been saved by someone whose story was far more complex than she'd ever imagined. The police arrived with flashing lights and urgent voices, transforming the quiet garage into a crime scene. As Alex gave his statement and Diana was checked by paramedics, neither of them could shake the feeling that this night had changed something fundamental between them. The careful distance that had existed between CEO and employee had been shattered by violence and heroism, replaced by something neither of them quite understood yet. But understanding would come later, along with questions about the past and revelations about the present that would challenge everything Diana thought she knew about the man who had risked his life to save hers. For now, it was enough that they had both survived, and that, sometimes, the most extraordinary people were hiding in the most ordinary places. The briefcase lay forgotten on the garage floor, its contents scattered but its owner safe. And in the fluorescent light of the parking garage, as police officers took statements and crime scene technicians collected evidence, 2 people who had lived in the same building for 3 years finally began to see each other clearly for the first time. What they would discover about each other in the days to come would prove that some encounters change everything, and that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with a single act of courage in the face of impossible odds. The morning after the incident found Diana Walsh in her office, staring at the security footage on her computer screen for the dozenth time. She watched herself hurry through the parking garage, oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. She watched the kidnappers emerge with practiced precision. And she watched Alex Carter transform from a mild-mannered security guard into something that looked like a trained killer. The way he moved wasn't random or lucky. It was calculated, professional, deadly. Every action had been precise, from his initial assessment of the situation to his final takedown of the attackers. This wasn't someone who had learned self-defense at the local gym. This was someone who had been trained to kill, and trained well. Diana's assistant knocked on her door, interrupting her thoughts. "Ms. Walsh, the police detective is here to follow up on last night's incident." Detective Martinez was a tired-looking man in his 50s who had clearly seen too many cases like this one. He settled into the chair across from Diana's desk with the weary resignation of someone who dealt with violence for a living. "Mrs. Walsh, I've been reviewing the case files from last night, and I have to say, you're incredibly lucky that Mr. Carter was there," the detective began. "Those men weren't amateurs. They had detailed knowledge of your schedule, your building security protocols, and your personal routines. This was a professional operation." Diana nodded, though her attention was divided between the detective's words and the questions that had been plaguing her since the attack. "Detective, what can you tell me about Alex Carter? I mean, beyond what's in his employment file?" Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Interesting question. Why do you ask?" "Because the way he handled those men, it wasn't normal. He moved like he had military training, extensive military training. But his employment application lists him as having worked various security jobs for the past few years. Nothing about military service." The detective leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "Ms. Walsh, I can't share details about Mr. Carter's background without his permission, but I can tell you that people sometimes have very good reasons for keeping certain parts of their history private." Diana felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of reasons?" "The kind that involve protecting their families," Martinez replied carefully. "The kind that involve starting over after sacrificing everything for their country." After the detective left, Diana found herself unable to concentrate on her usual work. She kept thinking about Alex Carter, about the way he'd looked at her in the parking garage, about the quiet authority in his voice when he told her to run. There was something familiar about him, something that nagged at the edges of her memory like a half-remembered dream. She pulled up his employment file on her computer, studying the sparse details with new eyes. Alex Carter, age 38, hired 3 years ago as a night security guard. Previous employment listed as various security positions around the city. No military service mentioned, no emergency contacts except for his son Jake Carter, age 10, 3 years ago. Diana frowned, trying to remember what had been happening in her life 3 years ago. She'd been promoted to CEO around that time, taking over from her predecessor after a series of corporate scandals that had rocked the company. There had been layoffs, restructuring, difficult decisions about personnel, and the memory hit her like a physical blow. 3 years ago, she'd been the head of human resources, tasked with cleaning house after the security breaches that had nearly destroyed the company. She'd been the one making the hard choices about who stayed and who went. She'd been the one who... Diana's hands shook as she opened her computer's archived files, searching through the personnel records from her time in HR. She found what she was looking for in a folder marked Terminated Employees, Security Division. Carter, Alexander James, former head of security, terminated for gross negligence resulting in compromised data systems. Military service, U.S. Army Special Forces, 2 tours Afghanistan, 1 tour Iraq. Honorable discharge, decorated veteran. Married to Sarah Carter, 1 dependent child. The file contained a photo from his original hiring, and Diana's blood ran cold as she recognized the face. It was Alex, but younger, dressed in a suit instead of a security guard's uniform, his expression confident and professional. This was the man she'd fired 3 years ago. The man she'd made the scapegoat for security failures that had actually been caused by outdated systems and inadequate funding. Her hands trembled as she continued reading. The termination report, signed by her own hand, painted Alex as incompetent and irresponsible. It recommended that he be blacklisted from security work at any major corporation. It suggested that his military service had left him unstable and unreliable. Diana remembered the meeting now. remembered sitting across from Alex in this very office as she delivered the news of his termination. She remembered how he'd sat perfectly still, his face expressionless as she read the charges against him. She remembered how he'd asked in a voice barely above a whisper what would happen to his wife's medical benefits. Sarah Carter. Diana's stomach lurched as she remembered the notation in the file. Alex's wife had been undergoing treatment for cancer. Treatment that was covered by the company's premium health insurance plan. Treatment that would have been cut off the moment Alex was terminated. With growing horror, Diana searched for more information about Sarah Carter. The internet search results were brief and heartbreaking. Sarah Carter, beloved wife and mother, had died 2 years ago after a courageous battle with cancer. She was survived by her husband Alex and son Jake. Diana stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with devastating clarity. Alex Carter wasn't just some random security guard who had happened to save her life. He was the man she had destroyed, the man whose wife had died because Diana had taken away their insurance coverage to save the company money and protect her own career. And last night, when she'd been in mortal danger, Alex had risked his life to save hers, without hesitation. He'd known exactly who she was, had probably known from the moment he'd started working here, and he'd saved her anyway. The intercom on her desk buzzed, startling her from her thoughts. "Ms. Walsh, Mr. Carter is here for his debriefing appointment." Diana's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd requested the meeting as a formality, a way to thank him officially for his heroic actions. Now she realized she was about to face the man whose life she'd systematically destroyed, the man who had every reason to hate her, but who had nevertheless risked everything to keep her safe. "Send him in," she said, her voice barely steady. Alex entered her office with the same quiet confidence he'd shown in the parking garage, but Diana could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes quickly scanned the room before settling on her face. He was still assessing threats, still thinking like a soldier, because that's what she'd forced him to become again. "Ms. Walsh," he said formally, taking the seat across from her desk. "I understand you wanted to speak with me about last night." Diana looked at him, this man who had saved her life, and felt the weight of her past decisions crushing down on her. "I wanted to thank you, Alex. What you did last night was extraordinary." Alex's expression didn't change. "I was just doing my job, ma'am." "No," Diana said, her voice stronger now. "No, you weren't. You went far beyond your job description. You risked your life for me, and I—" She stopped, struggling to find the words. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Alex waited, his posture alert but relaxed, like a soldier at ease but ready for action. "Do you know who I am?" Diana asked quietly. "I mean, do you know who I really am?" Something flickered in Alex's eyes, so brief that Diana might have missed it if she hadn't been watching him so carefully. "You're Diana Walsh, CEO of Walsh Industries." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Diana leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I know who you are, Alex. I know what I did to you." The silence stretched between them like a live wire. Alex's breathing didn't change, his posture remained steady, but Diana could see the subtle shift in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. "Alexander James Carter," Diana said, her voice breaking slightly. "Former head of security, terminated 3 years ago for gross negligence. Married to Sarah Carter, who was receiving treatment for cancer at the time of termination." Alex's mask finally slipped. Diana saw the flash of pain in his eyes, the way his hands clenched briefly before relaxing again. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "What do you want from me, Diana?" The use of her first name, spoken with such quiet intensity, made Diana flinch. "I want to know why you saved me. I want to know why you risked your life for the person who destroyed yours." Alex was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond Diana's shoulder. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but filled with a pain that made Diana's chest tighten. "Because that's who I am," he said simply. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I let someone die when I had the power to prevent it. Because my son needs to know that his father is a good man, even when the world tells him otherwise. Diana felt tears burning behind her eyes. Alex, You what? Alex's voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath now. You're sorry? You didn't know what you were doing? You were just following orders? I was trying to save the company, Diana said, knowing how pathetic it sounded. There were so many scandals, so much pressure to cut costs and find someone to blame. You thought you could destroy a good man's life to save your own career, Alex finished. You thought you could take away everything I'd worked for, everything my family depended on, and face no consequences? Diana nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Do you know what happened to Sarah? Alex asked, his voice so quiet Diana had to strain to hear him. Do you know what happened when we lost our insurance coverage? She died, Diana whispered. I know she died, and I know it was because of what I did. She died because we couldn't afford the experimental treatment that might have saved her, Alex said, each word precise and devastating. She died because I had to choose between paying for her medicine and keeping a roof over our heads. She died asking me why the people she'd trusted with her life had abandoned her when she needed them most. Diana was crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of her actions hit her. Alex, I am so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know I can't undo what I did, but I am so sorry. Alex stood up, his movements controlled, but radiating barely contained emotion. Your apology doesn't bring back my wife, Diana. It doesn't give my son back his mother. It doesn't undo 3 years of watching him ask why his mom had to die while other kids' moms got to live. I know, Diana said, her voice barely audible. I know I can't fix what I broke, but I want to try. I want to make this right somehow. Alex looked at her for a long moment, and Diana saw something shift in his expression. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of something that might eventually lead there. What are you suggesting? He asked. Diana took a shaky breath. I'm suggesting that I give you back what I took away. Your position, your reputation, your son's future. I'm suggesting that I spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I did to your family. Alex sat back down, his expression unreadable. And what makes you think I would want anything from you? Because of who you are, Diana said, echoing his earlier words. Because you're a good man who deserves better than what I gave you. Because your son deserves to know that his father is a hero, not just to me, but to the world. For the first time since entering her office, Alex smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was genuine. Sarah used to say that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what someone did to you. It was about choosing not to let their actions define your future. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman, Diana said softly. She was, Alex agreed. And she would have wanted me to give you the chance to make things right. Diana felt a spark of hope flicker in her chest. Does that mean you'll let me try? Alex was quiet for a moment, considering. It means I'll listen to what you have to say. But understand this, Diana. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Jake, and for Sarah's memory, and for the chance to build something better from the wreckage of what was. That's all I can ask for, Diana said. And Alex, thank you for saving my life, for giving me this chance, for being a better person than I deserve to encounter. Alex stood up again, but this time his posture was different, less defensive, more open. We'll see what comes of it, he said. But Diana, if you're serious about making amends, it's going to take more than words. It's going to take action and sacrifice and the willingness to put someone else's needs ahead of your own. I understand, Diana said, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes. As Alex left her office, Diana sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. She thought about the man who had saved her life, about the wife who had died because of her actions, about the son who was growing up without his mother. She thought about the company she'd built her career on, and the lives she'd destroyed in the process. For the first time in 3 years, Diana Walsh began to understand the true cost of her ambition, and for the first time in her life, she began to understand what it meant to be truly accountable for her actions. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges that would test both her resolve and Alex's capacity for forgiveness. But as she looked out her office window at the city below, Diana felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope for redemption, and the possibility that some wounds, no matter how deep, could eventually heal. The story of Diana Walsh and Alex Carter was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And somewhere in that city, a 10-year-old boy was waiting for his father to come home from work, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The best was yet to come.